I'll ask you a little bit about your family background. Where you were born, maybe, and
Well, I can tell you that, but I don't remember it. I was born up in Marinette, Wisconsin, which is far northeastern part of the state of Wisconsin, in what used to be a lumber town. And of course, the lumber industry being pretty nearly dead, why, that was going down the drain, but we did have about 3 paper mills in town, so it was still dependent upon what was left of the lumber. And I was born in the family house on Main Street in Marinette. My dad was an attorney at that time, and let's see, my brother was born about 4 years later, and he's still alive, living down here in Florida. I went to Marinette High School and graduated there in 1936, which seems like ancient history. After high school, I went to 1 year of freshman credits at the University of Wisconsin Extension Division, and then I got a job with the phone company and worked as a craftsman there for about 4 years. At the end of that 4-year period, I got brave enough to ask Jean to marry me after going together for 3 or 4 years, and I gave her a diamond ring on November 1st, her birthday, which was a cheap way to get a birthday present in. And 4 weeks later, World War II started, and it's never quit. We're still going on here, battling away. It'll be 55 years in October this year. Shortly after that, I took off in January to join the Air Corps, Army Air Corps it was in those days, and was sent down to Kelly Field in Texas with a group of about 8 or 9 other fellows from the Green Bay area. And we got started in Army life about the 28th of January in 1942. It doesn't stop. After about 6 weeks of living in a tent down on the end of the Kelly Field runway and listening to the AT-6s take off all day and night right over the top of the tent, we finally got through what they call ground school. It was assigned to a small Army Air Corps primary field in near Oklahoma City in a place called Cimarron. I doubt if it exists anymore, but it was probably a 20-mile trip from Oklahoma City straight west on a trolley car out to the air base. And at that point we started flying Fairchild PT-19s. That's a low-wing inverted engine type airplane. Put in about 60 hours on that, and then we're transferred to Enid, Oklahoma to fly BT, what do they call it? BT-13s, the bulky vibrator. And that was an interesting experience with the big engine out front. The only experience I remember about that were 2 things. One, my very first ride, my instructor, who was a hotshot, decided to make a formation takeoff on the wing of another guy in front of him. And we're going down the runway, and all of a sudden we're starting to knock off all the runway lights on the left side because he let it get away from him. We did manage to get up in the air finally. And that kind of scared me a little bit. That big 450 horse radial engine out there making a lot of racket. And so the first time I got to fly solo, I took it out and decided I was going to wring it out the best I could, because I had to learn to fly the airplane and not have it fly me. So I did stuff we weren't supposed to do, like I did a tail slide and rolled it over a few times and managed to get the oil tank cover to come off and cover the entire airplane with oil. So I took it back and landed it about as far away from the squadron operations as I could, and never said a word about it, and just walked back a quarter of a mile. And no one ever said anything, so I got away with that. But after that, I liked the airplane just fine, but I had to learn how to make it do what I wanted it to.
That, excuse me, that PT-19, that was open cockpit, wasn't it?
Yes, that was open. We flew from the rear seat. The instructor up front, we had a Gosport tube, and it was, I guess it's plastic or rubber tubing from his mouthpiece to my earpiece. No way to answer him back. And,
did that have a Franklin engine in it, or?
I think so. The straight six inverted is what I remember on it. They made about 3 or 4 versions of it, but we had one of the early ones. This still being early 42. And then we were transferred up to Enid to fly the BT-13, and from there we went on to Lubbock, Texas to fly twin engines. Apparently, I don't know why they selected me. I was probably taller than a lot of the guys, and the story was that they put taller fellows in twin engine because they're going to bombers, and shorter guys in fighters. We had some interesting experiences with the twin engine. We flew the 18-9, which probably doesn't exist anywhere except at the Air Museum down at Dayton, Ohio. We also flew the AT-17, I guess it was, or 19, I can't remember the number. The Cessna Bamboo Bomber.
Oh.
Remember that one?
Mm-hmm.
Twin engine, mostly made out of wood and fabric, but the Curtiss 18-9 was a neat little airplane. It had nothing but engines, short wings. It was made out of aluminum, and it really was fast, but it took off and landed and flew with pretty much all at 110 miles an hour, so there wasn't much room for error.
Everything at one speed.
I think it was intended to train us to fly B-26s, which were a hot new twin-engine airplane right then, but I never got to fly one. So finally, on October 9th at Lubbock, we all graduated, those that were left, and on the same day and about an hour later, I was married in the Post Chapel to Jean, and she always says I got my wings at 10:30, and at 12 o'clock she clipped them. There's some truth to that. We were assigned, I think luckily, to the Gulf Coast Training Command to fly AT-11 bombardier training airplanes down at San Angelo, Texas. We opened up a brand new air base called Concho Field. And my most interesting experience there was that as a brand new second lieutenant, they were supposed to report into the base commander, and so I asked some GI, where's the base commander's office, and he pointed over to a tar paper shack that was supposed to be built into a colonel's office. So I walked in the back door, and I'm standing right behind the colonel who's at his desk. and I didn't know what to do. I tried to salute and report and everything all at once, and it was kind of embarrassing. But got through that okay, and we flew for the next 15 months, flying bombardier cadets. 2 or 3 missions a day out to West Texas, drop 10 bombs, 10 of those 100-pound bombs filled with 95 pounds of sand and 5 pounds of explosive. And in the process, I learned how to run a Norden bomb sight, because every now and then I'd find an instructor who wanted to be a pilot, so he'd sit up in the pilot seat and I'd crawl down and drop the bombs. And it was true at that time, and without being shot at, that you could actually put one of those things into a small shack, maybe 10 feet square or so. With a good smooth run, it was actually possible to do that. A little different when you're looking down at a lot of flak and stuff flying around, but still we did pretty well when I finally got into combat. So about early 1944, they were looking for B-29 pilots, and I don't recall volunteering, but somehow I got volunteered into that group, and the first step was to go to Sebring, Florida, to learn how to fly a B-17. And so Gene and I kind of split up for a couple of days while I transferred to the air base out there, and then came into Sebring, which was a very small village then, and tried to find a place to live. And finally, someone from the air base came out and found an old rundown resort hotel, which we cleaned up and put army cots in, and then invited our wives to come live with us. So it was something less than beautiful, but everybody being in the same boat, it was a lot of fun. That place is still standing, as a matter of fact. We drove out there a year ago, and that old building is still there, and still ramshackle. After, 2 months or so at Sebring, we went to Alexandria, Louisiana, and picked up a crew and learned how to fly together as a crew, and learned how to fly the formations that the 8th Air Force was flying. And suddenly, along about that time, D-Day came around, and everything changed. Everyone that could fly a B-17 was transferred immediately to the 8th Air Force, which is where I wound up. Picked up the entire crew and got sealed orders saying we were going to the Pacific. We had suntan uniforms issued, and when we finally opened the sealed orders, we were going to England by way of Goose Bay, Labrador, and Iceland. So we were totally screwed up. But we made it. It was an interesting flight. Pretty nearly flew the airplane into the ocean about at the end of Greenland, because I went to sleep and my co-pilot was flying, and all of a sudden he's hit me on the shoulder and saying, something wrong with the airspeed, I can't get it up. And in order to get it up, he's diving, he's on instruments at night. So he's pushing the nose down to try to get the airspeed up, and it wouldn't come up. And I reached over and hit the airspeed heater, pitot tube heater, and it immediately popped to life, and we were doing about 200 miles going down rather rapidly. So we pulled out of that one. But it always reminded me of, and you see so many accidents even now in civilian life, how simple it is to crack up an airplane. And I've been wondering about the one down here just the other day at Naples, to why they flew into the ocean.
Yeah.
So anyway, we made it to England, and got assigned to the 8th Air Force 306 Bomb Group, 369th Squadron. Flew 30 missions, and got through it without getting personally hit, but had a lot of hits. Lost a co-pilot and had a gunner that was injured. But otherwise, that's pretty much it.
Well, you skipped over that pretty fast. I was going to ask you what part of England you were. You were northeast of London, weren't you?
We were, yeah, it's pretty much straight north up in the Midlands, near Bedford, England. Sort of between Bedford and Cambridge. And I think they call it the Midlands. I'm not real familiar with that whole area. We pretty much stayed on the air base. Had a bicycle and got off the base once in a while for a mile or two, but mostly either on the air base or get a ride into town, take the train to London. So that was pretty much the geography lesson that I had.
Some of the weather you had to fly in, there must have been pretty, a lot of foul weather over there in England.
Well, yeah, strange foul weather. Not so much violent stuff. You get more violent stuff right here in Florida. But a lot of fog, a lot of very bad visibility. It was strange. You could see straight down, but you couldn't see straight ahead. And as a matter of fact, I witnessed a mid-air collision between two B-17s right over the runway, right over our runway. Neither one of them were from our air base. But two squadrons meeting head-on, and the leader of one squadron went up and the leader of the other one went down, which is okay, except that the second or third plane of the one that went down didn't go down. He decided to go up, and he met the other guy right head-on. And that's because you just couldn't see ahead. From the ground, you could see him very clearly. So oftentimes we were coming back, especially in the late afternoon, really going from point to point on the ground is the best you could do. Of course, we had good radio direction finding and that sort of thing.
You didn't have any radar on your plane?
Not on the plane, no. Well, I shouldn't say that. We did have radar for bombing. We had what was called, geez, I don't know what it was called anymore. It had a code name. But it was a regular radar set, and the lead airplane had it with a special radar antenna, which was in the place of the ball turret gunner. And it was fairly accurate. You could hit within a mile or so of a target, but the targets were very hard to see unless they were either on a river, on the edge of a lake, or on the edge of the ocean, somewhere like that, where you could see a difference between the land mass and the water. So we did a lot of that sort of thing when we were over Germany, when you couldn't see the target, and instead of bringing the bombs home, we dropped them by radar and hit something sometimes.
When you went on a flight, you had to have your briefings and be prepared, your meetings to before the flight, probably pretty early in the morning. Huh?
Yes, we got up generally by 4 o'clock. We were on a double daylight saving time, and I can't recall what time the sun got up, but it was pretty late, maybe like 7 or 8 in the morning. So we were up well before sunrise. We went down. The routine was to go down to the mess hall and get something to eat, and then go down to the briefing room, sit through the briefing, wait for the colonel to pull back the curtains, and everybody gasped at whatever we were going to go after. And I then go back and get suited up and pick up a parachute and all that sort of thing. The navigators would go in and learn how to get to where we're going to go, which never was a straight line. It was always jagged back and forth to try to confuse the enemy or something, which I don't think we ever did, but we tried. And the bombardiers would go in and get a special briefing with a lot of photographs of the target and exactly what we were trying to hit. We always were trying to hit a strategic target. I suppose we succeeded about half the time, but the rest of the time you dumped them wherever you could get rid of them, I guess. But we did a pretty fair job of getting to the targets. I never turned back on 30 missions. We never failed to get to the target area, and we generally hit somewhere in the vicinity of the target. I was fortunate that at the time I was flying, which was, right, as I said, right after D-Day, starting in August, actually, of 1944, we had very little fighter opposition because we had fighter support, and P-47s and P-51s were following us right into the target. I saw a lot of air battles off at a considerable distance. You could see the contrails all balled up like a ball of yarn out there, maybe 25 miles away. And occasionally some of them would break through and come in on us. A couple of Me-262, the jet fighter, came in a couple times. But I don't think they knew how to shoot very well because they were going so fast and they come in head on, and I think the rate of closure was beyond what they could handle on their sights. At any rate, they didn't hit us. So we were fortunate from that standpoint, but the flak, of course, was very heavy, and you got used to it. It's funny how after a couple of missions, you almost just played a game with it. Every now and then somebody got hit bad, but it didn't seem to scare us that much after a few times. I was scared the first mission. I couldn't decide what I was going to do when I first got shot at, and they put it as a general rule. They put the new pilots in as a co-pilot. So I was co-pilot going up to Kiel, I think it was, up in the north coast of Germany. And it was a fairly simple mission. We came in over Denmark, made a big swing around, and then came back down to get Kiel coming in from the northeast. And I was really getting nervous because there wasn't a bit of flak anyplace. We hadn't seen any kind of opposition. And then all of a sudden the flak started coming up over the target, and I didn't have a thing to do with just sitting there watching the pilot fly the airplane. And I found out later it's much more important to be busy at a time like that, but when I had nothing to do, sit there and watch the darn stuff. And I didn't know whether I was going to jump out or what I would do, but it didn't bother me after I saw it for a little bit. And I was happy when I got home that I didn't make a damn fool of myself about getting shot at. And I remember that we had one little tiny piece of flak in the tail of the airplane when I got home, and my crew was flying with me. They were so happy to get a piece of flak, which they later on learned wasn't all that much fun, but that was about the size of a quarter, and it stuck in the tail.
You mentioned your crew. Now, did you have the same crew pretty much the whole time, or was there a constant turnover?
No, I had my regular crew until I started flying lead, which was probably around my 10th or 15th mission. I was over there as a first lieutenant, and I had a lot of flying time. So I wasn't really one of the new guys exactly, although I knew the combat. So they pushed me ahead a little bit, and I started leading the squadron, and later on leading the group, and so on. So at that point, I started flying with special equipment, special radar, special locating stuff, that a lot of top secret things at that time. And at that time, then I would start flying with different crew members to operate that special stuff. Jamming equipment was one time. I remember I flew an airplane just loaded with probably 25 or 30 radio transmitters, and a couple of guys sitting back there doing nothing but listening for a squawk and immediately putting a transmitter on that particular frequency. And then the Germans would hear that, and they'd move over, and then we'd go and jam that one. That was one mission. And generally, when we were flying with radar, I always had a separate radar navigator, they called them, flying back there in the waist. And I lost my ball turret gunner in a hurry because we started using the radar antennas in place of the ball turret. So, as a matter of fact, he's one of the two guys that's still alive from the crew. Not that they were all killed, but they all seem to have disappeared or passed away one way or another. So, the ball turret gunner and the bombardier are alive, and we met just a year ago out at one of our reunions.
You say your co-pilot was killed?
He was killed. That was a sad thing. He was well, I got to back up and tell you about him. When I first met him, and we were riding on a train somewhere in the States, and he came and sat down with me, and he said, he always called me Willie. He said, Willie, he said, I don't know if you really want to keep me on your crew. And I said, why is that? He said, well, I'm a kind of a screw-up. He said, I went through fighter training and never got all the way through because I kept buzzing things and doing all the bad things that you aren't supposed to do. And he said they finally canned me and said that I was going to be a co-pilot. And I said, well, can you fly an airplane? He said, yeah, I can fly. I said, well, then you're okay. You stay with us. And he was very good at it. And he learned not to be a screw-up too, actually. But he ultimately, as we had him in combat for 10 or 15 missions, I said, this guy is too good to be my co-pilot. Why don't you make him into a first pilot? So they did. And he had always said to me, he said, Willie, I'll never make it to be a first lieutenant. I said, yeah, I think you will. We went on a raid to Cologne, and we all got shot up very badly with flak. And his plane was actually forced to land in France. But the thing was, he would never wear his flak helmet. We always put on a flak helmet. And he would never wear it. He didn't want to monkey around with that sort of thing. And that's the kind of guy he was, fighter pilot quality. And darn it, if he didn't get hit in the head with a small piece of flak, and by the time they got her on the ground, he was unconscious, and they tell me that within a day or so he died over there in France. And so he never made it to first lieutenant, except that when I got home from that, I was delayed about a week to get home on that one. When I got back to the base, his first lieutenant stripes were there. They had just come through from headquarters. So technically he made it, but actually he was right, he never made it. But that was a bad raid. We, I don't know if we were trying to be heroes or what, but we had Murphy's Law with us, actually. What could go wrong went wrong. And I was flying a group lead pilot with my boss, Major, sitting in the right seat. And we started on the bomb run. We were supposed to go and bomb an air base east of Cologne, or rather west of Cologne. Are you running out of tape here?
No, I'm just checking to make sure
See if
that
I'm still on camera.
still on camera.
We were looking for this, it was a dirt field where it was supposed to be full of fighter planes. And this is right at the time of the Battle of the Bulge, and so they were kind of important to knock those fighters out. We start in, and there, the weather, P-38 goes in ahead of you sometimes and tells you what the target looks like, and he called back and said, you can't see the target, it's covered completely. So the next thing to do is to bomb by what we call G-E-E, G-E-E, and well, as I was saying, we decided to go in on G, which was a sort of a ultra-high frequency Loran. If you're familiar with Loran, two transmitters were set up in the front line, and by manipulating the readout on a cathode ray tube, the navigator was supposed to be able to get a precise point, which they could actually do. But it was going to be a bridge in downtown Cologne. So we started on that run. When got about halfway there, the navigator looks out and says, the original target is clear, we can see it. So we start a nice big turn right over downtown Cologne, which was the worst flak place in Germany. And we're just getting lined up on the target, and probably no more than 2 minutes from it when we really got plastered. 6 of the airplanes in my 12 were knocked down, including myself. Not, I'd say knocked down, but some of us landed because we couldn't fly them, and that was my situation. The guy in the right wing was on fire, and my co-pilot was right behind me in what we called the hole, right behind the lead airplane, and that's where he got hit. I don't know where the other ones were exactly that were knocked down, but a bunch of them were. And we were not actually knocked down, but the aileron control was shot out immediately. And all of the electrical equipment shot out. And they told me later we had about 375 holes in the airplane.
Wow.
One big one out in the wing that I could remember. So the humor of it was, and it's funny how you can have humor in a situation like that, but here we are, the lead of this outfit. We're out here in front. We're shot up to where we can't do anything. The bombs wouldn't drop because the electrical was out. The smoke bomb did fall out of the bottom, and that meant the other group, the other squadrons around the area would drop on those smoke bombs. We hit a little town called Gymnich, G-Y-M-N-I-C-H, I think, which was a crossroad about like 2 streets out here someplace. And but then here I am. We decided we better land because everybody's saying we're leaking gas so bad. The whole bottom of the thing was a sieve, and we couldn't talk to each other. Even from the navigator, we had to pass notes back and forth to decide which way to head and all that. And the only thing we had was a magnetic compass. The rest of it was all gone. So I want to abort the mission. I want to get out of it, but I'm up here leading, and the guy in the left wing is right tucked into me, and we used to chew him out. You know, if you don't get out there too far, get in close. So I started wiggling the tail. I still had a rudder, and the guy thinks I'm being funny, so he pulled it in a little closer. He put the wing in the window here, and we're trying to get out, and I'm motioning him. We didn't have a red light. We normally could have shot a light in his direction. we could have dropped our wheels, which is another signal to abort, but the wheels didn't go down, of course. And so finally, by making some rather violent maneuvers, we got out of the lead and dropped out, and then the rest of them went home. There were only 6 of them left then. So we landed at a little place out in near Brussels, and but we always kind of chuckled over the way that the more I tried to get out of the squadron lead, the more they tucked in so that I couldn't get out.
So you were kind of a pathfinder on that mission, huh?
Well, we were
What did you
the
call?
yeah. That's the leader. Always had the lead bombardier, and you were the guy that actually dropped on the target, hopefully. And the first 4 bombs that went out were smoke bombs, and then the rest of them followed that. And the other planes, the reason they did that, they wanted to get them all to come up to the same line to start the drop, so that they would all at least be equally left and right, starting at the right place, and then training them out forward. If everybody dropped when they first saw those bombs, then there'd be a bunch of them quite a ways behind where the target is. So let's see, I can't think of much else to say about that dumb mission.
That was in what, 44?
That was
45?
January 45, January 7th, I remember the date. And that was right toward the end of the Battle of the Bulge. We had a lot of missions during that period of time in December 44 with the Bulge going on, and the landings. We went up into northern Belgium and southern Holland, Eindhoven, places like that, while the British Army was moving up. And then, of course, when we landed that day, the January 7th, in near Brussels at an air base, forward, I think it was a fire base actually. It had these metal strips on the ground for a runway. The buzz bombs were being aimed at Antwerp, and they're coming right over this air base. So I got some real close look at I don't know what the Germans had, 20 millimeter or 40 millimeter 4 cannons in a cluster on a tripod arrangement that they could move, and they were shooting. And I actually went over to them one day because they were always right behind the buzz bomb, and I said, "Oh, can't you guys lead a little bit like we do with duck hunting?" You know? But they couldn't seem to get it out there. When we landed at that air base that day, we didn't have any brakes, so we did a sort of a semi-ground loop into about a foot of snow on the side of the runway to get it stopped. And I got out, and there was a British officer come up and said, I said to him, would you have one of your armament people come and defuse the bombs? I got a full load in here yet. And everybody backed away, and I said, no, there's no concern. He said, yeah, but see that burning hangar over there? One of your chaps just flew into that and blew up.
Ooh.
And so I could understand their concern.
So what were some of the longest missions you had to fly? Berlin, one of the longest?
Well, we went to Berlin. We went to Merseburg. That was an oil refinery southeast, I think, of Berlin. I went to Dresden on one of those famous raids that everybody thought was unnecessary in late April. I think it was April 17th, just before my birthday. And that was a long shot out there. Most of the raids ran about 8.5 hours of flying time, sometimes 9, 9.5. Of course, a lot of that was right over England getting formed up. We'd take off and circle and circle and
Circle forever, get
Yeah.
anybody.
And then getting the whole group into the right part of the bomber stream, we had to circle until we could cross a certain checkpoint right on time. It was quite a sight, I gotta say that. I remember the one to Berlin, the last one I went to in Berlin. I flew lead of all of the airplanes in the 8th Air Force because I had a job of going in and dropping chaff ahead of the rest of them. Kind of a dumb mission for me because I didn't drop any bombs or anything else, just threw out tinfoil. But we had 12 airplanes with big cartons of chaff in the bomb bays, and then 1 or 2 crew members were in there with the bomb bays open, and when we start down the bomb runway, they're throwing chaff And it worked very well. I got a letter from the leader saying that he didn't get any flack at all.
12 airplanes were dumping.
Yeah, that's all we were doing. We flew right next to the lead, all the way out there. And when we get to the initial point, then we pulled out in front of them and then started for the next 20 miles or whatever the IP was from the bomb release point, dropping chaff. And it was in February, early February of '45. And I recall the 8th Air Force went in about 3 days in a row, and the English Air Force went in 3 nights in a row, so there was about 6 or 7 heavy bombing raids on Berlin. And the day I was out there, it was a beautiful, clear day, and it was so nice that we were supposed to just go out and circle and wait for the first squadron to come around and join up and fly out with them. I said, let's make 2 or 3 circles and watch this, because we could see the bombs hitting down there and the smoke and dust were coming up. And we were very pleased that we were killing Germans and wrecking Berlin. That was our whole job.
Huh. Did you ever have anybody in your squadron or your group have to fly to Sweden or Switzerland?
Not that I knew, and not that I recall even. We lost a couple of planes at various times, and we couldn't understand why we lost them, and I never did find out where they went. I remember New Year's Day, we had a heck of a party at the officers club, and everybody got pretty drunk because we were told we would not be flying on New Year's Day. 3 o'clock in the morning, a sergeant comes in, wakes me up and says, okay, you got to get your group up today. We're going to be a maximum effort mission, which I thought was a pretty dirty trick. But anyhow, to make a long story short, one of my crews took off, and long before they were anywhere near getting shot at, they disappeared, and nobody knows where they went. And I don't doubt that they might have gone up to Sweden, but I don't know that for a
I guess
fact.
quite a few planes, not quite a few, but a number of planes went up there, and
Yeah.
of course they had to stay there until the war was over, and some of them even married Swedish girls.
Yes, I suppose, and I think they did the same thing in Switzerland.
Yeah, they did.
Although the Swiss, as I understand it, there were a lot of Germans in Switzerland, so they didn't have such a nice time.
The B-17 was not pressurized, so it was really you had to fly extremely high, so the weather, the temperature was.
That's pretty cold. I saw it down at below 60 below zero.
60 below.
60 below. I hope the thermometer was right, but I know it was very cold.
I'm going over to return some stuff.
Oh,
Okay?
Jean says she's going over to return some stuff.
Am I on?
You're on TV. You want to get on TV? I just told them how we got married about 55 years ago.
Nice
Okay.
meeting you guys.
The interruption was my wife. Anyway, what were we talking? Oh, we were flying. We usually flew around 28,000, up as high as 32,000 was the highest that I remember, and it got pretty mushy at that altitude. We really were staggering along pretty good. And the temperature is very cold. Of course, you're on oxygen almost from the time, well, from the time we got out to the English Channel going out, we'd be at about 12,000. So you're on oxygen for 5-6 hours at least.
Did that breathing through an oxygen mask all that time have any adverse effects on your sinuses or your?
No, I don't think so. I think it had, if you had a hangover, it was good.
Cleared you up good.
Yeah, you're on 100% oxygen. And I never had any real trouble with it. There was all kinds of rumors, like you became sterile.
Oh, yeah.
Stuff like that, but that even didn't turn out to be true. So. No, but it's uncomfortable. But still, we had the later model of mask. You've probably seen in some of these TV movies where they have two little round things and then a little bag hanging down. Well, we didn't have anything like that. We had a mask that fit right over in a big tube of oxygen coming up in there, and a good microphone. It was really the best microphone we had.
Was it a throat?
No, they were pretty scratchy sounding. No, this was a mic built right into the mask, and And it was probably the best microphone we ever used because there was no outside noise getting into it, just your breathing, but otherwise you could understand very clearly.
I know those planes are pretty confining. When I was down here a couple of years ago, I went through, well, not here,
Yeah.
Florida. They're pretty, they're a big airplane, but they're still pretty small on the inside.
Yeah. Well, you didn't have a chance to move around anyhow. The only guy that did much moving maybe was the engineer. He had the top turret, and otherwise he would stand between the pilot and co-pilot and check the instruments and all of the engine gauges and stuff. The navigator and bombardier were up in the nose, and they didn't have much to do except the navigator, of course, was at his desk. But everybody had to sit in a rather confined location. The ball turret gunner was the one that had the tough job as far as confinement, because he was really rolled up like a ball in there.
If you had to bail out, it must have been terribly difficult for the ball turret guy.
Theoretically, I guess he could roll it around and flip a door open and drop out that way. Otherwise, it would have been a lot better if he rolled it so that he could crawl up into the cabin and then jump out a door or window or something there. Actually, probably one of the worst, well, not the worst, but one of the bad places was the tail gunner. He had a very cramped position. He had to back up and open a side door that he could fall out of. I think pilot and co-pilot would probably be the last ones to get out of the thing, if you could possibly hold it from spinning. We had a pretty tough route to try to fly. In fact, I never did figure out how I would do it. I figured I'd probably never get the chance, which I fortunately never did.
Now, when you came back after you were right there until the war ended?
The war ended in Europe. On May 8th, I took a kind of an unusual trip. They wanted me to run over to Buchenwald concentration camp and drop leaflets in 4 languages or something to the people that were being released by the Army. The Army was in there, and they didn't really have any equipment or any way to talk to most of these people, so we went in low and dropped a lot of leaflets all over the place so that the people there could pick them up and read them and be assured that this was the American Army and that everything was okay and that they should just sit still and wait. And that was a pretty bad scene to see that, but that was the last mission of the war as far as I was concerned. I had a kind of a strange thing happen on that one. When as soon as we dropped these leaflets and flew around and looked at Buchenwald a bit, I decided to drop right down to the treetops and come home all the way across Germany and France, just buzzing just for the fun of it. And right after that, we come up over a hillside, and just as I get up over the top of the hill, here's a German guy on his hay rack with 2 horses, big load of hay, and of course I went right over his head. I probably blew the hay right off the rack, but the horses bolted. One went one way and one went the other way. Cart went head over tea kettle. And I was telling that story last year when I was out in Las Vegas at one of our reunions. There was some guy sitting at the table, and he said, "Were you the guy that was flying that airplane?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "I bummed a ride with you that day because I wanted to see Buchenwald." And he said, "You scared the hell out of me." And he remembered it very clearly. He was sitting up in the nose where the bombardier said, and I hadn't seen him in 50 years. But
Oh, that's pretty good.
so after the war, after that time, of course, the war was still going on in Japan, but we were then assigned to take aerial photographs of all of Europe and the coast of the Mediterranean all the way down to the coast of Africa, down as far as Dakar. And I, being the squadron operations officer, got stuck with that job even though I had plenty of points to come home. And so for the next I don't know, 4 or 5 months. Well, I got home in the end of October, so it was probably through June, July, August, September at least that we were doing all this aerial mapping. And we flew at exactly 12,000 feet and took pictures, three-dimensional pictures in a way. They took a picture every 20 seconds, and that meant that they overlapped. And then they would project these pictures from the projectors up in the ceiling of a hangar. And where they overlapped, they'd have one of them in green and one in red, and they could use a kind of a binocular microscope type of thing, and they could actually measure heights. They claimed as accurately as about 10 feet, so they could see the top or the base of a building and measure the difference. And we flew all through Europe up to where the Russians were, and back and forth and back and forth, 100-mile strips, and then had them all laid out on hangar floors to make sure we didn't miss anything. And of course, one of the things we found out was that when the bombardier would be the fellow to fly it straight. He'd pick out a point as far up as he could get the bomb sight, and they fly a very straight line with that. Trouble was, when they laid it out on the hangar floor, they had big curves in them and big gaps in the middle. And we did a lot of chewing out about that until finally somebody discovered that the reason for that was that our maps that we were flying from were not accurate. And so it would show checkpoints that really weren't in line. And so these bombardiers were doing exactly what the map told them to do. As a result, we had to go back and fill in a lot of gaps where we had holes. So I monkeyed around with that for about the 4 months. We were transferred down to Marrakesh in what was then French Morocco, and spent a month or so down there flying the coastline of Africa. We didn't do the whole of Africa, but just in from the coast a couple, I don't know, maybe 100 miles or so. So we were well prepared with three-dimensional maps just to start World War III at that point. And now I'm sure in fact, your friend had some knowledge of this, your English friend.
Yeah.
What's his name again?
Ken Joel.
Ken, yeah. Ken, in fact, I talked with him about it. He knew something about that. So then I finally got home on about the 1st of, well, it was actually, I landed at West Palm Beach. On the way home, we flew the Southern Atlantic route. I got a train ride up to Great Lakes in Illinois, and got on the, what was then called the electric line. I can't think of the name of the darn thing. Milwaukee, something or other, electric line. North Shore, on Halloween, which is the last day, I guess, of October, and I had my most serious flak problem then. Some kid threw a Coke bottle through the window of the train as we're going through some city down there. That was right next to me. Glass all over me. Didn't get hurt, but that was more flak than I'd run into for 30 missions. Got home November 1st and got back together with Gene, and then we started going to college again under the GI Bill. Went back to the University of Wisconsin in Madison and finished up the next 3 years in about 2.5 years actually, because we had 3 semesters a year at that time, carried a heavy credit load. Got through and then got back to the phone company.
And where all did you live when you worked for the phone company?
Phone
Different
company?
cities?
Well, yeah, not too many other cities. We started after I graduated in 1949, early 49, I think it was January. I went back to work at Milwaukee in the engineering department. And went from Milwaukee to Racine for a couple of years, and over to Madison a couple of years, and then back to the Milwaukee area. And that was about it as far as moving. We did spend a year out at the University of Pennsylvania in 1958, somebody decided that I didn't have enough humanistic studies, so I had to go out and learn music and art and literature and all that wonderful stuff in 1 year. And it was fun. We had a good time, but the company paid for it, and it was a real pleasure to do it. Although being an engineer and being a combat veteran and a few other problems that I've always been accused of being too serious-minded, I couldn't see any sense in all of this foolishness. And I told them that several times out there, that what would this possibly have to do with my engineering a telephone office or something? And of course the answer was, well, you got to be civic-minded and all that wonderful stuff. And I said, yeah, but I wasn't going to go down and burn out the city library or anything in the first place, so I don't really think this is necessary. But yeah, it was really a great education, and I can't knock it. But that was the only time I got out of the state of Wisconsin.
Now, your degree was in engineering?
Electrical.
Electrical engineering?
Yeah. And I didn't actually get to do that much engineering. It's, you learn in a hurry that management is about 90% of what goes on. And so I got to be chief engineer at one point, and that's as close as I got to really doing engineering.
And you lived in, I can't think of the name of it there, where you sold your home here.
Oh, Waukesha.
Waukesha.
That's a suburb of Milwaukee.
You lived there quite a long time.
Yeah, I lived there 30 years. 30 years until 2 years ago we decided to buy this place down here, and we still have our cottage up there in the North Woods near Hayward.
In the winter, huh?
Near winter, yeah. Winter, go to winter in the summertime. And yeah, I guess you're familiar with that area anyway.
How about your ham radio activities? When did you first
Well,
get interested in ham radio?
I was interested in that before I got out of high school, really. But I never got anywhere with it. I was up there in a small town. There was one ham up there, and he wasn't very sociable. Well, I remember going to see him once. That's about as much as I got out of it. And my dad had no knowledge of this sort of thing, so I didn't get any encouragement. And then when I got in the Air Force, or the Air Corps, we learned the code. So when I got out and went back to the university, I began to learn all the stuff you need to know to pass the written part of it. And in 1948, I ran down to Chicago one early morning, left about 5 in the morning from Madison, and got down to the FCC office down there and took my general test. And so I've been a ham ever since 48.
48. Now you and Jean have how many children?
Just one daughter. And maybe that accident did do something. But no, we just have the one, and we have 2 step-grandchildren and 2 grandchildren, so we've got a bunch of kids around. Great. So shall I push the red button?
Yeah, I think that's wonderful.